Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Offroad YouTube 101. Today we're going to do an episode that I've really been looking forward to for quite some time. As you can see, there is a ton of camera equipment laid out on the desk right here. And today we're going to talk about my camera gear. Good, you're still here. So this video is probably gonna be, well, it's gonna turn into something that's a little bit more drawn out, I'm assuming, because once I start talking about this stuff, it's kind of hard for me to stop. I'm gonna start nerding out. There is a lot of memories laying around me right now, and this is some of my camera gear. Yes, some of the gear, not all of it, just what I could fit on the table without making like a mountain. So let's dig into it. I've made myself some notes so that I can kind of keep on track with what's going on here, and I'll try to stay on track without without dipping away too much. So a lot of you guys know me as a YouTuber, but I started the whole camera obsession a long time before YouTube. I've been into cameras, specifically photography, since before high school. And this video is going to focus not just on me as a YouTuber and my camera gear, but we're also going to lay a bit of a foundation on the evolution of consumer electronics and what has allowed things like YouTube to even come into existence to what it is today. And we're going to transition along many years of consumer electronics here, and just talk about how the evolution and the constant change in this gear has led to where we are today and has led to where I am today as a YouTube creator. So let's dig in here and let's start with this gem. The gem. Many of you will probably recognize a camcorder like this or similar to this. It is a older Sony Handycam. The first era that really became usable on a consumer level, the first era of camcorder that really became affordable on a consumer level. What you're looking here is probably a model from the early 90s. And I was born in the mid 80s. So anyone else born in the mid 80s will probably remember, you know, going to family events, birthdays, Christmas, Easter, weddings, all sorts of stuff like that, other key events, and someone was lugging one of these around. And I mean, this was the first step into actually being able to create some good, usable family home videos. Usable. Today's standards, not so much. Back then, oh yeah, sweet. You were pretty much like a Hollywood producer with one of these. But I'm sure every one of you guys have gone to an event and, you know, mom was behind the camera or dad was behind the camera and they were trying to film something, and, you know, you're filming on what was here was like a video 8, so like a small cassette, and you had a limited recording time, a limited battery time. A lot of the cameras didn't have like an optical image stabilization back then. They had very entry-level optical or digital type stabilizations. The video was choppy anytime it wasn't on a tripod. It was really a finicky beast. So you'd have mom or dad yelling, hey, you know, everyone get together. We're filming. The record's on. Don't be silly. Because what we fail to remember sometimes is it's really easy to film video and take photos today and to edit that. Back then, you could film the video, you couldn't really edit it. I mean, aside from being a total like AV nerd back then and having a full setup, and that cost you a lot of money back in the day, you'd have a heck of a time trying to edit content off this camera here, because you were kind of stuck with what you could record to, maybe minus making a few in and out cuts, because you would have this hooked up to your VCR with a cable, and basically you'd be rewatching the video through here and then hitting stop, start, and record on your VCR to piece together a bunch of clips on a home video. If you wanted multiple copies, then you could spend some money and get a VCR with a record feature where you could put in 2 tapes and dupe, or you would have to send that final version off to somewhere and pay them a few bucks to duplicate you a few copies. Later on, you'll hear people like, you know, getting those videos converted to digital, stuff like that. But that was really the entry level of being able to like have something in your hand and go out and get some videos. What we have as YouTube today is possible because of the technology we have today and the accessibility of that technology. A lot less people had that type of gear back then. The internet wasn't really a thing, and digital wasn't really a thing yet, so to speak. Digital in the sense that we know it today with photography and just being able to hold your smartphone up and get 4K footage, for example, or just any high resolution footage. So in order to understand where we're going to go with this whole conversation, we have to understand a little bit of the development of consumer electronics and their accessibility to us as people and their affordability. What you see here is years and an evolution, decades of transitions and upgrades and improvements of various consumer level. I'm not even talking pro level, but just like consumer to prosumer level electronics. And we're going to walk through these, we're going to talk through them, and we're going to see how all these basically led to what we're at right now. Here you'll see a bunch of GoPros lined up from a GoPro Hero 1, the OG GoPro, all the way up to Hero 10 right here, where they've gone. And that's going to be a video within itself, essentially, the evolution of the GoPro Action Cam, where it is and where it started and what it's become. It's such an amazing package. And when you think years back, if you showed someone that little camera years ago, they'd think it's alien. Like, the capabilities of such a small package, unbelievable. So how can we do this? Let's start off with this bad boy here, the Safari Sport Shot 2 35mm. The first camera my parents and myself ever really used. A lot of my childhood memories were snapped on this bad boy. Going to the zoo, birthday parties, stuff like that. What a ghetto setup. This was like an entry-level kind of point and shoot film camera from the day. Its only real feature was, I mean, it had a lot of features because it auto-exposed. You didn't have to worry about focusing. You just put some batteries in. It did auto-rewind. You just set the ISO and stuff like that. And it was pretty decent. You could snap some decent memories with it. I think a lot of people that grew up in the 80s and the 90s will remember a camera like this. And it was realistically all you really needed for many people. Those were the first kind of real consumer type of like usable, decent quality point and shoots. That now we think of a point and shoot, we're thinking digital, right? So in order to understand like my transition into the YouTube thing and how I ended up with all this gear, you need to follow, we got to start at the foundation. We got this camera right here. Right here we have a Praktica MTL3, my first camera, my first real camera, an SLR, not a DSLR, a single lens reflex camera, fully mechanical. You hear that? Yeah. There's no electronics in this. There's a little button cell battery that goes in here because the only feature on this camera to help you get a shot was the exposure meter. Right here, you click that and a little arrow, a little needle moves inside. There's a circle, there's a high line and a low line, and your goal is to kind of get it in that middle of that circle to set your exposure. You set your ISO up here, and essentially you're controlling the focus, you're controlling the exposure, the shutter speed, the f-stop, the aperture settings, all of that. It had a timer on it. It had some... This camera is so heavy duty. I mean, you could beat someone over the head with this camera and then just take pictures of it. I mean, there's nothing in this camera to break. Everything is mechanical. It's like a metal shutter inside. This camera gave you a style of a photo, a certain feel to a photo. There is a skill set involved in this camera. My grandfather gave me these cameras. This was his other Praktica that he gave me. slightly different lens on it, more of a portrait lens on there. A wired shutter release. You hear that? That's awesome. Yeah, that's sweet. Anyways, this is a really cool camera, fully mechanical. Oh, I just exposed the film that was in there for who knows how many years. Well, at least we got it on video. Who cares? I'm never gonna process that. It's probably like $50 to process it these days. This camera teaches you how to be a photographer, because if you can pull off getting some good shots with this, you can pull off getting good shots with anything. Which I want to transition into a conversation about how photography itself has really evolved. What you're seeing here is you're seeing an evolution. You're seeing my first DSLR, I'm so used to saying DSLR, which is a digital single lens reflex. These are SLRs, single lens reflex cameras. You start off with these SLRs. These were built in West Germany, all assembled by hand. Cameras built in the 70s, transitioning into like the SLR that I ended my SLR game on, which already had an LCD display on here. It had a processor inside. It had an auto mode even. You could set your aperture or your shutter speed. It would adjust exposures and all of that. This was the last era of film before they went to digital. I grew up in the digital transition phase. When I was coming out of high school, we were transitioning into digital. And I remember I considered myself an amateur photographer back then. I loved photography. My grandfather taught me a lot about it. For years in Europe, he worked as a photographer as one of his gigs back in a day when not everybody had a camera. So he actually made good money at the time. He made some poor life decisions and didn't really invest that money properly because he liked to have a good time. But later in life, when he cleaned up his act, he passed on a lot of cool knowledge my way, and he taught me how to use these cameras. He taught me how to be a photographer and frame a shot and set the camera settings up and understand them, which gave me a very strong base level foundation that I think a lot of people are lacking these days. It taught me the actual art of photography and the skill set required to utilize a tool like a camera. As we evolved, not to take away from photographers of today, but the camera has started to do a lot more and the photographer has started to do a lot less. Hate on me all you want. It's just the way it is. Let me touch on that. A good analogy I like to use these days is, let's look at these SLRs, then we'll look at this SLR, which was definitely, it wasn't a high-end SLR at the time, but it was a nice camera and a big step up from these. I remember the first time I got this camera, I was just so excited. Digital was already creeping in, and part of me is like, this is my last chance to buy an SLR before like the inevitable. And a lot of older photographers that have been in the game for 15, 20, 25, 30 years back then were very resistant to digital because it was a big change in an industry they understood. A lot of photographers back then were saying things like digital will kill what we know as photography today. And in a way, they were right. In a way, they were totally wrong. It changed the photographer. It changed the scene. It changed the value. It was a huge change in so many things. So we got the SLR here, and then we'll dive into DSLR, so digital single lens reflex cameras. But what you needed to do as a photographer back in these days of the SLR, especially the very manual setup, is you were basically limited to 24 frames in a roll of film. Professionals would often use 36 exposure rolls with the availability of a 48 frame roll to maybe like the more elite, the sport photographers, guys with a bigger budget. But for argument's sake, we're going to stick to a 24 standard exposure roll versus a DSLR of today, which is this camera packaged with like a computer in it and taking a digital shot versus an exposure on a film, like a physical film. So you had 24 shots. You're a sports photographer. You're at a sporting event, and you needed to get some shots. So what you did was you loaded up your 24 frames, and back in that day, the analogy would be photographers of the past were snipers. Many photographers of the present are basically dude behind a minigun with unlimited ammunition. Different strategy of, a machine gun and completely different strategy of a sniper. This guy had 24 shots. In between those 24 shots, if he wanted more, he had to, in this case, flip this up and rewind that roll, remove the roll, like we did here, we opened it, from the camera, pull the film out, put it aside, load up a new roll of film, engage it, take a shot or two to progress that film, click it through. Here it was all manual, right? No motors, no auto rewind, and then start taking more shots. Also, that guy didn't have a viewfinder on his camera that showed him the shot right away. He had to develop that film. So that forced these people to frame a shot, set up a shot, expose a shot, focus a shot, and put a lot of time and effort into making every click of that shutter count. Yeah, you could still fire off a bunch of shots in rapid succession in a sporting event, especially like a championship game or something like that, and you'd show up with 50 rolls of film, and you'd have multiple cameras because you wouldn't be able to reload all the time. If you were really a badass photographer, you'd probably have an assistant there. You'd hand them the camera, they'd swap over the film, they'd hand it back to you. You had 2 or 3 cameras on the go, different lenses, all that. But you still had to focus a lot more energy on getting that shot. Whereas these guys today, I go to events and I'm nosy and I'm nerdy and I like to pay attention to other people filming video or photographers, and you'll see them. You see this guy, and he's got his DSLR, he's got his big lens, and he's holding 15, 20 grand of gear, and he's just like, he's essentially filming a video shot by shot, every action, every throw. He's got this massive camera, he's got the ability to easily shoot between 5 and 10 frames a second, and a buffer of 10 to 50, 60 shots depending on his gear and his budget. And instead of having 24 frames on there, he can shoot 24 frames in like a few seconds, and he has the ability to hold 500 to 4,000 plus photos on that little memory card. Also, the ability to preview them right away on his screen, see how they're turning out, and adjust his shooting to that. Now, in the good old days, let's call them, you had to get those shots, and then you were excited. You couldn't wait to get back and get them processed. So either if you were a high-end photographer and you needed these shots quick, you had access to a dark room, or later on you had access to the equipment where you drop off your rolls of film and someone processes them for you right away. And then you send those off, or the negatives off, to the newspaper or the publication that they're using them in. And in between, you get to look at those and be like, wow, those are awesome. But if your photo was underexposed, overexposed, something wasn't sharp enough, you couldn't really go into it and tweak every aspect of it like you can today in a program like Lightroom or Photoshop, where you can tweak and edit every photo. The pros had ways of editing and improving photos back then, but they were nothing like what we're used to today. So it forced people to really become very skilled at what they did. Whereas these days, it's a game of math. If you take enough photos, if you take 10,000 photos during a football game or a soccer game, then out of those 10,000 photos, there's a likelihood that, you'll get 10 wicked shots if you take a rapid fire succession of every single action event. Versus even a professional photographer that back in the day would have taken 400 or 500 shots on a manual camera, the success ratio would be much different. But I'd be willing to argue that the guy in the good old days would have had more keeper shots out of less photos than these days people have keepers out of more photos, if that makes any sense. So the success rate was probably much higher percentage-wise than it is now, but surely what we do now is we just make up in numbers. You just take a ton of shots, and then eventually some of them are good, and then the ones that are like a 7 out of 10, you can turn into a 9 out of 10 with some proper post-processing on Photoshop and Lightroom. It's not cheating, but it's changed the art of photography. It's made different things important. There's different focus points now on what you need. A really good camera these days helps you a lot. A really good manual camera back then still relied on you as the computer. These days, if you know how to work that camera, you can make magic with it. Even a crappy photographer these days can pull off some amazing National Geographic level photos if they're in the kind of the right place at kind of the right time and kind of lucky. The same can kind of be said for video. You go from like the transition of like this thing to the camera I'm filming on right now, which is like a $5,000 4K Panasonic camcorder, or like my transition. So let's not dig into video. Let's finish up with photo. So photo has evolved into what I would use now is my by no means professional level DSLR. It's a Pentax. I've only been shooting Pentax for quite a few years. Here's a Pentax body. There's a Pentax body. Here's a Pentax body. A bunch of Pentax lenses. I got a few more of them. This is a nice lens for it as well. Pentax is a camera that I like to shoot with. They'd be considered kind of by the purists and by the more professional photographers in the overall photography game. This camera would be not really something that they would really look twice at. But filming off-road and shooting off-road in a rugged, wet, rough environment, man, this camera has bounced off the floor of my off-road vehicle 20 times. Yeah, I've broken a lens here and there. I can submerge this camera. I can get it soaked. It can get dipped in a mud puddle. It can get covered in mud, and I can wipe it off. I can wash it in the sink under running tap water if I need to. I've washed these cameras in a creek. No one makes a camera that's as well weather sealed or as rugged as these Pentax cameras, and I've proven that over and over again. In order to get a camera coming close to this in the Canon world, you have to spend big money. We're looking at a Pentax KP here, which is essentially a $1,000 camera body, and then you choose the glass you want on it. I've gone through a few lenses because of all sorts of issues we won't get into, but if I was using anything else, can't even think about how much abuse I would have caused. These are amazing cameras. You can get them on a budget. Even some of the older Pentax cameras, they have very good sensors. They can, if you know how to work the camera and set it up and get a good shot, you can get some wicked photos with these cameras, which is why I often recommend the Pentax cameras. My good friend Nathan shoots Pentax. He really got me into them. Canon, better autofocus. Pentax, decent autofocus. The weather sealing and the ruggedness is what keeps me on the Pentax game front, and the cost factor. You get good bang for buck. Pure action photography on a bigger budget, fully professional, full frame Canon, 100%. Shoot with like a 5D or something like that, right? But a lot of the other companies are starting to go away from single lens reflex cameras. And Pentax is one of the last companies still doing it. Everyone else is going to mirrorless now, but we won't go into that. Like I've got a mirrorless camera here, a Panasonic Lumix. Good camera. I never got comfortable with that camera. It was a really cool camera package that offered a lot of bang, especially at its time, but it just, something about the DSLR is what I feel I need to use. So let's get into the revolution of digital. So after these cameras came out, after I used my last SLR, this was my first digital camera. This is a Fuji FinePix A210. I think I paid $500 for this camera. Came with a sweet 64 megabyte card included with it. It was a bundle deal. And it shoots a solid 3.2 megapixels and gives you the ability to preview that shot right away on this massive, like, 1.8 inch screen. Yeah. Back when I got this camera, this thing was sweet. I splurged on this bad boy back in high school. This is big money. I took a lot of great photos on this that look like garbage right now. I went back and looked at them a little while ago before I made this video, and I'm like, oh my god. I have all my photos cataloged from like 2000 to 2022 by year folder. Like, I've kept all that stuff. I'm a pack rat. Pentax, cheap point and shoot I got. That was way better than this one, but on today's standards, still pretty crappy. A Canon point and shoot. And here's a Nikon point and shoot. This one's really important. This Nikon Coolpix is a completely waterproof, weather-sealed, drop-proof, freeze-proof, really rugged, solid camera. And when you look at it, you can kind of tell it's being beaten. It is scratched. I'm hoping you can see this stuff okay on the video. The video is just secondary to what we're talking about, but yeah, hopefully it sounds good and you can see it okay. But this is the camera that started it all as far as this is concerned. This started the YouTube channel. I wasn't into video at all. I was ATVing a lot at the time. I was getting ready to get my first side-by-side, so it was around 2010, 2011 when I was getting ready to get into my first Razor 900 XP. I had this camera. I liked to use it because my DSLR at the time was just too big to carry around on an ATV. This thing slips in your pocket. It's waterproof. It's got good battery life. You don't have to worry about it. It gets wet or dirty. You just wipe it. And the cool thing about it is it also shot 1080 video at 30 frames a second. And at the time, that was kind of like a decent standard. So I'd shot a few videos and my buddies saw me. I was always taking pictures like, hey, shoot some video of us doing crazy stuff in the side-by-sides and share it online. Like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I've never edited a video. I love photos. I mean, I was using Photoshop at the time already for years, but I'd never shot video. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But anyways, they talked me into it. They did some stupid stuff for the camera. We got some cool shots. I looked at them at home on the computer. I'm like, that was pretty neat. I mean, yeah, whatever. Okay, let's try it. So I load them on my computer. Then I download some free video editing software. And that's where it goes from there. I slapped together this video, which actually was pretty easy. The software was easy to use. I mean, I've been into computers since I was a kid, into camera gear and electronics. I grew up in this era. So with that being said, I slapped together this video, my first video ever, and then I needed a place to put it. So obviously the only place to upload it was YouTube. So I had to make a YouTube account. I had to think of a YouTube name. I'm like, I like Adrenaline Junkie Prod makes sense. Adrenaline Junkie Production. Production was too long. Whatever. Adrenaline Junkie Prod was born. This camera made most of the first early videos, and it put me on the map. Doesn't matter what you start to film with. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have a crazy camera or a cheap camera or a cell phone. Content is king. I say it all the time. YouTube says it all the time. Create good content. The rest is secondary. So I need a little bit more versatility from that camera. I need a little bit more zoom. I need a little bit more picture quality. 30 frames a second wasn't cutting it. There was a lot of motion blur. My videos started doing pretty decent on YouTube for the time. They were getting 50, 60, 70,000 views. I'm like, you know what? I'll go spend like a couple $100 and I'll get a camcorder. So I went out and I bought this super cheap, cheapest they had, Sony Handycam. They've gone a little way since then. So this thing is still junk compared to what we have today, but it shot 1080 at 60 frames a second. This thing's a paperweight. It had some digital stabilization, I believe. It was pretty crap. When I'm holding it right now, it weighs like nothing. I can't believe how much video I shot with this camera. I can't believe what this camera survived. There is still mud on the lens right now from its last use years ago. Yeah, I filmed some of my biggest hitting videos that put the channel on the map using this little $250 at the time camcorder, and it was budget. This was an entry level. Like, it didn't have optical stabilization like the higher end models did. I'm just like, screw that. I'm not paying for that. This was way better than that. That's what I was basing it on. This was better than what I had. It was nowhere near the best, but it was better than what I had. So if I could film better than what I had, my videos could do better than they had. So, cool. Later on, I transitioned to another camcorder. This is the Canon HF line. This is an R50. There's a couple models very similar to this. It offered some entry-level optical stabilization, 32 time optical zoom, and also built-in digital stabilization as well, a much nicer screen, a better camera, and I also upgraded to an external entry-level cheapo, like $50 shotgun mic, and I would put it on like a camera mount like I still use today. I love these mounts. It would mount on there. I'd have my mic on there. I really stepped up the game with this, and then I got a few more. At a time, you could get these on like B&H or Amazon for like legit like $150 for these. Nothing bang for buck compared to the package this little camera delivered at $150, and the fact that you knew if you destroyed it, it wasn't a deal breaker, big deal, you know, like you broke it, it sucks, it's $150, but the comparable cameras cost $700-800 each, and for what I was doing, I really couldn't justify spending that money at the time. And for years, those are what I used. In comes GoPro. So in between this and those, we have the GoPro Hero 1, the original GoPro, the one you had to put in a stupid plastic case and get rid of the terrible, like the audio on this was already terrible. You add one of these and it was just like absolutely unusable. I was not a fan of GoPros at the start because we filmed in bad conditions and you always needed a hard case. So you'll see here, I had a hole cut in my hard case and Dremeled out, which would allow me to run a microphone input into here. I don't have the mic kicking around here. I just had this little mic that stepped up the audio level a bit. Early on in the game, I found out the hardest part of shooting off-road video is definitely capturing decent audio, especially using subpar equipment like I had in a small package. So this Hero is what started the action cam game, but was far from what GoPro wanted. It shot 1080 at 30 frames, 720 at 60 frames. So like the video quality of this was not great. But it offered a lot in a little package. And then I found it really not very usable, which is why I pretty much never used it, and I always use this. All the content I always captured on that early GoPro, I'm like, wow, if I shot it on this camera, it would have been better, and the other stuff was unusable. So I threw it in a corner somewhere and I forgot about it, and I transitioned to this and that. In between this and the Canons, the GoPro 3s came out. The GoPro 3, in my mind, this is a 3 Plus. The 3 and the 4 were the first real usable GoPros that gave you what you really wanted out of an action cam and what they had promised. Still a lot to be desired, but much better video quality, also much better audio, not much, but better audio, better low light, and definitely better video stabilization. I started using the 3 and the 4 quite a bit, but the stabilization on them was pretty poor. In comes the Fiutech 3-axis gimbal. This is a G5. I filmed a lot of early videos on this gimbal setup. This is how people are always like, how are you filming with a GoPro and getting the quality shots you have? How is it so stable in the Razor? It was on a gimbal. This thing was finicky to use. It wasn't really weatherproof. But hey, this thing went through some abuse too. The 5 came out. The 5 was really a revolution. The 5 was a game changer. When the GoPro 5 came out, they had really stepped up the stabilization. They have given us a package where the camera itself was actually waterproof to like 30 feet or something like that, and eliminated the need for that stupid hard case. So the hard cases were still a thing if you were going deeper, or if you needed to really abuse the camera more, then you would still use the hard case. Never use them. I think I've put this in a hard case like 2 or 3 times and it's absolutely useless. The screen's broken on this one, but still works, still waterproof. Really solid step up from GoPro. I remember around the time that the Hero 5 and 6 were kind of coming out, I remember hearing like a press release from the creator of GoPro saying that that era of the 6 and 7 was really what they had envisioned at GoPro when they first released the main camera, which they weren't really satisfied with, but they needed to transition and develop everything step by step to get to where they are. I find that the best, so the 5, I got the 6 here. The 6 was a good step up from the 5. Stabilization was a little better, offered 4K at 60 frames a second. Things continue to improve, but I really feel that with GoPros, it's usually like, you know, like the 1, the 2 wasn't great, but the 3 plus was a big step up. The 5, the 4 was pretty good, a little better than the 3, but the 5 was a big step up. The 6 cleaned up the 5 a bit, but the 7 is still my go-to camera these days. I've got 3 of these right now that are my main fleet. It offers everything the 5 did and even more. 4K at 60 frames a second, semi-reliably, good video quality, decent microphones if you set it up and use it right, and amazing bang for buck even today. This camera will film everything you need to be successful on YouTube, realistically, doing action sports. It obviously does well supplemented with a camcorder, but if you know how to use this, if you know how to set it up, if you know how to post-process, this camera is amazing. So I've got 3 7s sitting right there, and then we've got a GoPro 10 here. I skipped the 8 and the 9. I'm glad I skipped the 8. There was lots of issues with them. The 9 was working out bugs, and in the 10, they've released a brand new chipset and new Hypersmooth 4.0. It even records in 5.3K now, which I don't know what I'm going to use for, but I haven't even opened it yet. I'm going to do another video on opening that up. That's my newest camera, and I basically haven't jumped forward since the 7, so it's going to be a big step up to the 10. I'm really excited about it. But it shows you once again, you don't need the most advanced camera gear to film this kind of footage. You just need good gear and then some skill and some post-processing ability. So we've talked through the GoPro evolution. In between the GoPro cameras, like the Wasp Cam came out, a camera that thought they could knock off GoPro, and these guys put a little bit more budget into it than, let's say, your generic China camera that just feeling this thing, it's so light and crappy, and like this is supposed to on paper, where when you see the Amazon ads for these 4K action cams, oh yeah, it's just like a GoPro. It's nothing like a GoPro. Don't ever waste your money on low budget action cams. GoPro is the only way to go. If you want to go a different brand than GoPro, then go with DJI, but GoPro is the way to go. Like these Wasp cams never caught on. I'm pretty sure they went bankrupt. Mostly they didn't have the support, the network, and the quality was not comparable to GoPros. And the price point was very similar. So like, how could they compete? GoPro cornered the market, and they still own it. Early on, when 360 video came out, Insta360 sent me 1 or 2 of these. I couldn't do it. I tried. It just wasn't the feel I was after. The 360 video has struggled to catch on. It's really cool when done right, I agree, but for the type of content I create, it was just one extra difficult step in running the cameras and all that. I never caught on. It never caught on with me. In between the GoPro 5 and 6, they released the GoPro version, the Karma Grip. This is like their gimbal stabilizer. But I find that once the 7 came out, this was just like garbage. You didn't even need this thing anymore. The stabilization from Hypersmooth 2.0 and up was just revolutionary. You can go like this with your GoPro 7 or your GoPro 10, and the image stays straight. I won't get into how they do that. It's pretty cool. But the image stabilization on the newer GoPros is literally like cheating. You basically have a gimbal built into every camera. No sense for those mechanical gimbals right now. Still popular in like the DSLR filming world and the pro world, where the bigger cameras don't have that type of stabilization. But in the action cam game, no longer necessary. Where's that bring us? Wow, we're making pretty good time. I think we've covered a lot of this. What this video is supposed to show you is that there's a lot that goes into creating these YouTube videos, but you don't necessarily have to spend big money on an entry-level camera setup. Yeah, I've got quite a collection here. I really do. I've amassed like there's so much money and time and memories sitting on this table right now. Like, these devices are built to capture moments and create memories. And on top of that, I've created so many memories creating those memories. I love this camera gear. YouTube has just provided me with a platform to expose and share what I create with so many people, and really instigate me to do more, and motivate me to create even more content that I probably wouldn't if this many people weren't enjoying it. If you guys want to hear more about specific camera gear or camera equipment, or have specific questions, let me know. I'll be doing a video on my GoPro settings. I'll also be doing a video on like the type of mic I use, the audio setups, like mounting my GoPros, where I mount them, what works, what doesn't, tips and tricks to recording, and stuff like that in more detail. This video is just a blanket summary of kind of the foundation of what led us here. I mean, here you got like a ton of mounts. We'll go over GoPro mounts as well. Like, got a bunch of RAM mounts here. I must have 5 or 6 different tripod setups, if not more. I mean, all sorts of camera lens filters. We got batteries for days. Batteries for the camcorder we're recording on. GoPro batteries, like, these are my GoPro 7 batteries. I think I've got about 40 of them in here. When you film 4K on a GoPro, you don't get much battery life. Yeah, microphones. I just got this new microphone set up, like a podcast mic, which I'm hoping sounds good. I really hope the audio sounds good in this video. I've been trying to perfect that because this type of format is very new to me, this type of recording. So yeah, I mean, I think I missed a few cameras because there's no sense of really digging into them, but you see the evolution here. And, you know, it's technology and this evolution of technology that's allowed us to even sit here and chat like this, and you guys watch this video, because years ago, not even factoring in the internet, like the internet alone has made most of this possible, but then the evolution of this consumer electronic industry and the accessibility of the fact that everyone's got a smartphone. Most of you are watching this video on a smartphone or a tablet. People have dash cams. People have all sorts of other camera equipment. Essentially, most people out everywhere they are have some form of recording audio or video, which in a way has kind of shifted things, because we see all these crash cams, we see all these like closed circuit TV, security cameras everywhere. Everything is being recorded. Back in the day, you didn't get all these fail videos, you didn't get all these funny videos, not because the stuff wasn't happening, but there was just no way for the masses to capture it. YouTube is possible because so many people now have the ability to record anywhere they are, and you can now edit a video on your smartphone or on your tablet, and you can make a masterpiece using your smartphone. You can film everything you need on the smartphone, you can edit it, you can upload it, you can run your channel and your social media all off of essentially a smartphone. Like, this is an iPhone 8 or something like that, I don't know, or a 9, I don't even know. I need a new phone. But if you got one of those Apple iPhone 13s or one of those brand new Samsungs, and like the video quality and the audio quality out of those is unreal. You can literally make a movie using that phone, and I think people have. So your creativity is your limiting factor. You don't need a massive budget. Now, yes, I understand that a phone like that can cost like $1,200, but that's it. That's your editing rig, that's your recording, that's your post-processing and the upload and everything. And it's your office in your hands. So when you factor in $1,200 to do all that, it's really a lot of bang for buck, including the fact that it takes amazing photos. These days you're out somewhere and you look at it like that. Oh, look at that scenery. It looks beautiful. Snap. Looks exactly the same. Captured on that smartphone. It looks better than on this what would years ago be considered professional camera equipment. You can snap it on your smartphone and it looks amazing. So factoring that in, I mean, it's amazing what this has evolved into. Think of the old days of what the old YouTube was, something along the lines of America's Funniest Home Videos. People would send in their video clips, and everyone always liked watching fails and silly stuff and funny moments of kids and animals. These days, when every other car has a dash cam, where everyone's holding a smartphone, it's just so much easier to capture that content. So much more content gets captured. It's a numbers game. It's just like the photographer of the past taking 300 photos in an event, and the photographer today taking 3,000 photos. That's 3,000 opportunities, 10 times the opportunities to get that shot versus 300. So all of that factors in. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was a little insight into like behind the scenes of the YouTube world, or just the world of a photographer and a creator in general. Whether or not you're uploading your content, whether or not you're just sharing it with family and friends or yourself, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of amazing photographers out there today that just take photos because they enjoy it, that probably have a collection like this sitting at home because it's what they like to do. Just like a car guy likes his cars and his tools and his car parts that he probably doesn't need so many of. He hoards them because he enjoys it. You don't need to build 6 classic cars, but people do. Just like cars, ATVs, pickup trucks, all that stuff has evolved over the years and continues to change. So does consumer electronics, and so does the space of a creator. What used to be reserved for Hollywood is accessible to everyone now. So it's really cool to see. Not all change is essentially good, but there's constant change. So we're always changing and evolving, just like our gear is. Like the evolution of camera and photography and videography equipment has led to the evolution of the art form itself and what we're used to seeing and what we want to consume. Just like the evolution of the pickup truck has led to the evolution of the pickup truck owner. I would be willing to bet that back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, a different demographic of people owned pickup trucks than they do now. Those pickup trucks offered different creature comforts and different abilities back then than they do now. So a lot of people will tell you there are not trucks anymore, but it's just a constant change. We live in a fluid environment where nothing is ever the same for long. So essentially you just have to adapt. There's a lot of people that got left behind with digital, the evolution of digital that pushed back. They got left behind. The people that embraced it moved forward with the technology and continued to flourish. You can look back at the good old days and reminisce on them, but that doesn't mean that the what's coming in the future is bad. It's just a matter of adaptation. Electric cars are a good example. Years ago, you thought you can catch on. Tesla and a bunch of other companies have proven to you that it can. Do you have to go out and buy an electric car? No, but you can still appreciate the technology and what they are, and the fact that there will be more of them in the future, whether you want to push back or not. So I'm going to leave it at that, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of an insight into my mind, what I think about when it comes to stuff like this. Make sure you check out some of the other videos in the Offroad YouTube 101 video series. Also check out some of our trail riding videos and our how-tos, stuff like that. Follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. You can check out the Shopify store if you want some cool swag. And I'll leave it at that. So thanks for watching, guys. Ride safe out there, and see you in the next video.